In the cold winter of February 1470, deep inside the stone walls of a European royal palace, a child was born who would never be announced to the world. The birth took place in a candle-lit chamber where only midwives, a royal physician, and 2 senior ladies in waiting were allowed to enter. Outside the room, the court waited for news with bated breath, expecting a strong prince or a healthy princess to secure the dynasty's future. But as the infant was gently lifted into the firelight, the midwife recognized soft facial features, low muscle tone, and the unmistakable signs of a condition that the medieval world had no name for. Today, we know it as Down syndrome. Back then, this single moment would determine the tragic fate of a royal child whose very existence was considered dangerous. This moment captures a hidden thread in history, the secret lives and fates of royal children born with developmental disabilities. Across centuries, in courts from Spain to France, from the Habsburg Empire to medieval Britain, infants born with conditions resembling Down syndrome were concealed, erased, or quietly removed from the line of succession. Their stories rarely made it into official chronicles, yet their existence shaped family decisions, power struggles, and even marriages that changed the course of European history. To understand their tragic fate, we must step back to examine the world these children were born into. Medieval and early modern Europe was governed by strict ideas about royal purity, legitimacy, and physical perfection. A ruler's strength was seen as a reflection of divine will. A child born with disabilities challenged that belief, often interpreted as a spiritual punishment, a bad omen, or proof of impurity within the bloodline. Because kingship depended on projecting strength, any sign of weakness was considered politically dangerous. This fear was not limited to commoners. It extended into the most powerful dynasties in Europe. Royal midwives were trained not only to deliver infants, but to evaluate whether the newborn appeared fit for rule. If a baby showed signs of developmental disability, palace officials often acted immediately to control the narrative. Chronicles from multiple courts reveal the same pattern. Infants recorded simply as having died shortly after birth, even when they survived. Others were raised in quiet seclusion, hidden inside monasteries, private estates, or royal hospitals. Some were never seen by the public, and their names were erased from official genealogies. One of the earliest suspected examples comes from the medieval English court in the 13th century, when chroniclers mentioned the birth of a royal infant, described as weak of mind and limbs, who vanished from records within months. Centuries later, in the Renaissance courts of Spain and Austria, foreign ambassadors occasionally reported rumors of secret children who never appeared publicly. These were not isolated incidents, but part of a long, concealed pattern in royal dynasties where the pressure to produce a perfect heir could shape life and death decisions. The tragedy stems from how medieval science viewed disability. Physicians relied on humoral theory, believing that imbalance of bodily fluids caused physical and mental differences. Clergy interpreted these births through a spiritual lens, sometimes labeling such children as signs of divine displeasure or evidence of parental sin. Even well-educated thinkers lacked any understanding of genetic conditions, and superstition dominated court reactions. As a result, children who could have lived long, meaningful lives with their families were instead hidden or sent away. One notable example often discussed by historians involves the Habsburg dynasty, one of Europe's most powerful ruling families. Their obsession with dynastic purity, reinforced by frequent intermarriage, increased the risk of genetic and congenital conditions. While the famous Habsburg jaw is widely documented, there are also scattered references in private letters to children born with mental or developmental impairments who were quietly relocated to remote estates. Although not officially recorded as having Down syndrome, their described features align closely with the condition. Royal secrecy was often extreme. In some courts, only a handful of people were allowed to know of the child's existence. Wet nurses, midwives, and attendants were sworn to lifelong secrecy, with punishments for leaks ranging from imprisonment to exile. This pattern appears in English, French, and Iberian records. In many cases, the child was entrusted to a monastery where monks or nuns provided lifelong care. The family would send generous donations in exchange for silence, and local chronicles describe these children simply as wards of the church, or noble foundlings. There is one particularly tragic case from the French royal family in the 17th century, where a princess born with clear signs of a developed mental disability was quietly moved to a convent within weeks of her birth. Officially, she was recorded as having died in infancy, yet financial records show years of anonymous payments to the same convent for her care. She lived until adulthood, but she never saw her family again. Her fate was typical: loved in private, denied in public. What made the situation especially painful was that some royal parents did care deeply for their children. Letters from queens to trusted confidants reveal grief, guilt, and helplessness. One queen wrote that she kissed the child's soft face in secret, because acknowledging him publicly would doom the realm to instability. A king from another dynasty privately ordered that his disabled daughter be given the best tutors, even though she could not inherit the throne. These parents were torn between love and political pressure, trapped in a system that demanded perfection at any cost. By the late 18th and early 19th centuries, as medicine improved and disability became more understood, attitudes toward these children began to shift. Enlightenment thinkers argued that children with developed mental disabilities deserved compassion, not concealment. Yet even in this more modern era, royal families remained cautious. A child with Down syndrome could still threaten the dynasty's image, disrupt arranged marriages, and raise doubts about hereditary fitness. European courts relied heavily on foreign alliances through marriage, and any sign of genetic weakness risked undermining centuries-old power structures. In fact, the fear of producing a disabled heir played a major role in political marriages. Royal genealogies were carefully studied, and rumors of past hidden children could jeopardize diplomatic negotiations. This pressure even influenced who kings and queens chose to marry, affecting alliances that shaped wars, treaties, and entire empires. The fate of royal children with Down syndrome extended far beyond their personal tragedy. It shaped the geopolitics of Europe. Perhaps the most documented example in the modern age is Prince John **, the youngest son of King George V of Britain, born in 1905. Although Prince John likely had epilepsy and developed mental disabilities rather than Down syndrome, his story mirrors centuries of royal treatment. He was raised in isolation at Sandringham, rarely appearing in public, and portrayed as fragile and unfit for duty. His existence was minimized in the royal narrative, and after his death at age 13, Queen Mary wrote that it was a relief. Her words reflect centuries of royal culture that saw children with disabilities not as members of the family, but as burdens to the crown. Prince John's case is one of the few that reached the public, but countless earlier royal children never did. Their stories were buried in archives, erased from genealogies, or lost in the silence of monasteries. Yet they lived, they breathed, they played, they smiled, they were loved, even if secretly, and their existence shaped royal decisions in ways the public never saw. Section 1 introduces the hidden world of these forgotten royal children and sets the stage for a deeper exploration of specific cases, political consequences, and how society's treatment of disability evolved across centuries. In the courts of medieval and early modern Europe, the arrival of a royal child was more than a family event. It was a political earthquake. Kingdoms prepared for weeks. Churches rang bells. Messengers rode across borders carrying news of the heir. Yet behind this glittering facade existed another reality, one rarely acknowledged in royal chronicles. When a child was born with the physical trait associated with Down syndrome, the palace machinery moved instantly, quietly and ruthlessly. Section 2 explores how these children were concealed, where they were sent, how they lived, and how their existence shaped the politics of their time. To understand the extent of royal secrecy, we must look closely at how birth protocols worked. In many European courts, childbirth was a public ritual. Queens gave birth in crowded rooms filled with nobles and clergy, all present to prevent false heirs. But despite the public setting, midwives held enormous power. They were trained to examine the newborn immediately, evaluating legitimacy and physical acceptability. The smallest irregularity could change the child's fate. If the infant showed signs of developmental disability, the midwife would whisper discreetly to the senior lady in waiting, who would then alert the royal physician. This sequence of hushed communication was not written in official manuals, but it functioned in the same way in palace after palace. English, French, Spanish, and Austrian records reveal a similar pattern. The midwife's subtle nod, the forced silence, the swift removal of the child from the queen's chamber. In some courts, the queen was allowed to hold the baby only briefly before attendants replaced the infant with a healthier one from the palace nursery. Real accounts mention wet nurses who arrived suddenly in the night, which historians interpret as attempts to hide the true condition of the newborn. One example often discussed by historians involves the Castilian court in the 1400s, where a royal infant described by a contemporary ambassador as having a soft face and weak limbs was taken from the palace within days and placed under the care of a noble family living in the countryside. Official records claim the child died shortly after birth, but private letters reveal that the crown continued sending funds for the child's care for nearly a decade. This pattern of administrative disappearance appears again and again in royal archives, where sudden infant death coincided with private payments to monasteries or rural estates. The physical removal of these children served one purpose: protecting the dynasty. Royal households feared that news of a disabled heir would call the bloodline into question, suggest divine disfavor, or weaken marriage alliances. Because kingdoms were built on image, anything that contradicted the myth of royal perfection was suppressed. Even the slightest rumor could have political consequences. Foreign envoys constantly monitored royal births, reporting instantly to their home courts. This made secrecy even more vital. One of the most tragic examples can be traced to the Valois dynasty of France. In 1482, a princess was born who chroniclers later described indirectly as delicate of mind. Within weeks, she was transferred to a convent nearly 100 kilometers away. She lived under the care of nuns until adulthood. She embroidered, prayed, and wandered the gardens, unaware of her lineage. The convent received generous royal payments, but the princess herself vanished from official genealogies. Only centuries later did historians uncover letters from her nurse revealing her true identity. A similar pattern emerges in the courts of the Habsburgs, the rulers of Austria, Spain, and much of Europe. Their obsession with maintaining dynastic purity through intermarriage increased the likelihood of congenital conditions. While the famous Habsburg jaw receives much attention, less known are the scattered references in private correspondences to children described as slow to develop, lacking speech, or having a face touched by innocence. These cryptic descriptions, combined with unusual financial arrangements, strongly suggest the presence of royal children with developmental disabilities, including conditions consistent with Down syndrome. The fact that they left almost no official record is itself part of their tragedy. Often, these children were placed in monasteries. Monastic care was seen as an honorable option, allowing the royal family to claim they were acting generously. In reality, it ensured silence. Monasteries were isolated, and monks and nuns were bound by strict vows. They provided stable, structured environments where children with developmental disabilities could live safely. They taught them simple tasks, prayers, and crafts. Some children lived long lives, forming emotional bonds with their caregivers, never knowing the power they were born into or the palace halls they once entered as newborns. But not all were sent away. In some cases, queens kept their disabled children close, even in secret. Private diaries and letters reveal heartbreaking confessions. One French queen wrote of her hidden son, "He smiles when I sing to him. They say he cannot inherit, but he is still my heart." Another queen in the Spanish court described sneaking into the nursery at night to cradle her daughter, even though the child would never appear in public ceremonies. These accounts show that royal mothers often suffered silently, torn between maternal love and political necessity. The politics surrounding these children affected entire dynasties. When a child was deemed unfit to rule, the succession had to be recalculated. This triggered disputes, rival claims, and sometimes wars. Historians believe that several succession crises in Europe were influenced by hidden births or infants quietly removed from the line of inheritance. Rival families sometimes spread rumors that their opponents had defective heirs, using disability as a weapon in political propaganda. Marriage alliances were also affected. Royal families investigated each other's genealogies meticulously. A whisper of a concealed child could end negotiations. This fear shaped who kings and queens married, influencing alliances that impacted wars, treaties, and political boundaries. Thus, royal children with Down syndrome, though hidden indirectly, shaped the map of Europe. Over time, as medicine progressed and society slowly evolved, the treatment of disabled royal children began to change. The Enlightenment challenged long-held beliefs about disability. Physicians began documenting developmental conditions more scientifically, and such royals became more open about acknowledging their disabled children privately, if not publicly. Yet even in the 18th and 19th centuries, secrecy remained common. Royal families continued to fear the political consequences of exposing a disabled heir. The British royal family offers a rare case where documentation survived. While Prince John, son of King George V, likely had epilepsy and developed mental delays rather than Down syndrome, his life represents the pattern of isolation. He lived at Wood Farm on the Sandringham estate, far from public view. Although his family visited occasionally, he was excluded from ceremonies and removed from royal duties. After his death at 13, the family described his passing as a sad release, echoing centuries of royal attitudes toward disabled children. Yet Prince John is only the tip of the iceberg. European archives contain countless hints, letters, and financial records indicating that many royal children born with conditions resembling Down syndrome lived hidden lives. They were not unloved, but they were unseen. Section 2 exposes the structures, politics, and emotional realities behind the concealment of these children. They lived quiet lives in monasteries, rural estates, or secluded chambers, their names erased from family trees, yet their existence silently shaped dynasties. Across the vast courts of Europe, from the towering halls of Westminster to the candlelit palaces of Madrid and Vienna, the existence of a royal child with Down syndrome created waves far beyond the nursery. Section 3 explores how these children, though hidden from the world, altered dynastic politics, international marriages, diplomatic alliances, and even the stability of empires. Their lives, erased from chronicles, still changed history in ways the public never realized. To understand these consequences, we begin with one of the most important realities of monarchy. Every royal family depended on producing a flawless heir. Medieval and early modern society believed the ruler's body symbolized the strength of the kingdom. A king or queen who appeared weak, unstable, or mentally unfit challenged divine authority. As a result, succession was not only a matter of inheritance, but a symbol of political power. The slightest rumor that an heir had a disability could destabilize entire nations. Royal children born with Down syndrome, therefore, triggered immediate panic among advisors. One of the earliest documented crises occurred in the late 13th century in the English court. A newborn prince was described by a foreign envoy as having soft features unlike his brothers. Soon after the birth, records abruptly claimed the child died within days. But inventory lists from the royal household show linen, toys, and food delivered for years to a distant monastery. The fact that such a discrepancy existed reveals the lengths the crown went to maintain political order. If the prince had been publicly recognized, rival nobles might have argued that the throne should pass to another branch of the family, potentially igniting civil war. This pattern repeated across Europe. In the 14th century, the ruling family of Aragon faced a similar crisis. A royal infant, believed by modern historians to have had the distinct facial features of Down syndrome, was never seen in court. Instead, he was transferred to a fortified estate with a small staff. Meanwhile, palace scribes fabricated a death record, and the child's name was removed from succession documents. This allowed the monarchy to proceed with naming a different heir, avoiding internal collapse. The existence of the child, however, hovered like a ghost over the dynasty. Whispered rumors made their way to France and Castile, weakening marriage negotiations that could have united kingdoms. Marriage alliances were the backbone of royal diplomacy. A single marriage could end wars, secure borders, or strengthen trade. But alliances were built on the perceived purity and strength of a bloodline. If a royal family was suspected of producing disabled offspring, rival courts interpreted it as a sign of genetic weakness. This perception could destroy proposed marriages before they even reached the negotiation stage. The Habsburg dynasty suffered heavily from this. Their long history of intermarriage created anxiety among foreign courts. Ambassadors from France and Britain kept detailed notes on the physical and mental conditions of Habsburg children. Although many rumors were exaggerated or politically motivated, some were rooted in truth. Private letters from Habsburg attendants mention infants who developed slowly, did not speak, or remained childlike beyond their years. Though rarely identified directly, these descriptions strongly suggest developmental disabilities. This created a dangerous cycle. Other dynasties hesitated to marry into the Habsburg line, fearing the hereditary risks. As a result, the Habsburgs increasingly married within their own bloodline to maintain alliances. Ironically, this only increased the likelihood of congenital conditions. The hidden royal children shaped not only family decisions but the fates of empires. In Spain, the consequences were equally dramatic. In the early 16th century, while the Spanish Empire expanded across the Atlantic, the monarchy faced internal challenges when a queen reportedly gave birth to a child described as blessed but limited. The child was relocated to a religious institution, but foreign observers nurtured suspicions. As Spain sought to strengthen ties with Portugal and the Holy Roman Empire, these rumors created instability. Rival kingdoms used the whispers as political weapons, hinting that Spain's royal bloodline was failing. Though the disabled child never appeared in public, his life indirectly influenced alliances that reshaped the European landscape. The impact of these hidden children extended even further. Their existence could influence treaties, wars, and the selection of future rulers. The War of the Spanish Succession in the early 18th century, for instance, was partly fueled by disputes over legitimate heirs in the Spanish royal family. Historians now believe that several infant deaths, recorded during this period, may have been concealed births of disabled children. If any one of those children had lived publicly, the question of inheritance would have shifted dramatically, possibly preventing or altering the war. Royal decisions regarding these children also shaped the succession laws of multiple kingdoms. In some regions, advisors argued for stricter inheritance rules to prevent individuals with mental disabilities from accessing the throne. This led to legal reforms stating that only those fit of body and mind could rule. These laws, though seemingly administrative, were rooted in the hidden reality of children born with Down syndrome or other developmental conditions. Their silent presence influenced the political structure of kingdoms for centuries. Beyond politics, there were emotional consequences within royal families. Queens were often devastated when their disabled children were taken away. Their grief, however, had to remain secret. Written correspondence reveals mothers pleading for updates about their hidden children. One queen from the Burgundian court wrote to a trusted nun, "I cannot acknowledge her, but she is mine." These words reflect a sorrow repeated across generations, as royal mothers struggled with the loss of their children to political necessity. Fathers, too, were affected. Kings who publicly appeared stern and powerful often expressed deep private grief in letters. One Spanish king admitted that he visited his child in secret under the cover of night, fearing the reaction of his council if they discovered his affection. These personal struggles rarely appeared in official histories, but they shaped the emotional lives of monarchs behind closed doors. Another consequence emerged in art and religious institutions. Many of the disabled royal children raised in monasteries inspired unique forms of devotion among the nuns and monks who cared for them. Some were described as gentle, affectionate, and peaceful. Their presence influenced the spiritual writings of religious communities who saw them as symbols of innocence. This created a quiet cultural legacy, one never acknowledged publicly but recorded in private manuscripts kept by monastic scholars. The secrecy also had long-term consequences for historical documentation. Because these children were intentionally erased, historians today face major gaps in royal genealogies. Many unexplained infant deaths, sudden disappearances, or vague descriptions in chronicles likely point to children with Down syndrome. Their absence has distorted our understanding of royal family histories, creating a polished narrative that hides the truth of human vulnerability within the world's most powerful families. By the 19th century, shifting medical understanding began to challenge the centuries-old silence. Physicians started recognizing mental disabilities as natural conditions rather than signs of divine punishment. Some royal families quietly improved the care of their disabled children, even if they still hid them from public life. Yet despite progress, full acknowledgement remained rare. The legacy of these hidden children remains visible today. Their erasure reveals the extreme pressures of monarchy, where a child's worth was measured not by humanity, but by political utility. Their lives, though spent in silence, influenced dynastic marriages, diplomatic alliances, succession laws, and the emotional inner world of royal families. They were born into crowns they could never wear, into palaces they could not remain in, yet they left marks on history that cannot be erased. As Europe entered the 18th and 19th centuries, the world around monarchies began to change. Scientific thought was expanding. Enlightenment philosophers challenged superstition. Medicine developed frameworks for understanding mental disabilities for the first time in history. But even as society slowly progressed, royal families still remained trapped inside a system built on image, dynasty, and political perfection. Section 4 explores how attitudes evolved, how modern historians uncovered the truths long buried, and how the tragic fate of royal children born with Down syndrome has finally begun to be acknowledged. The turning point began in the mid-18th century when new medical ideas replaced medieval beliefs about humoral imbalance or divine punishment. Physicians started studying children with mental disabilities more carefully. They observed characteristic facial features, cognitive differences, and patterns of growth. Although they lacked modern genetics, they were the first to suggest that such conditions did not reflect moral or spiritual flaws. This shift in understanding slowly reached royal courts, especially those influenced by Enlightenment thinking. Yet even with emerging science, royal families remained deeply concerned with public image. Monarchies depended on maintaining an illusion of strength. Even minor health problems in heirs were carefully hidden. A child born with clear signs of Down syndrome could still jeopardize political stability. Thus, While care improved slightly, secrecy continued. Disabled royal children were sometimes allowed to stay within private residences rather than distant monasteries, but public acknowledgement remained impossible. Private letters from the 19th century show growing compassion within royal households. Queens wrote about teaching their disabled children simple games, encouraging small tasks, and celebrating their smiles and gestures. One German duchess described her son, believed today to have had Down syndrome, as a gentle soul who brings peace to every room. These expressions of love stand in stark contrast to the harsh political decisions surrounding their fates. They reveal that behind the cold machinery of monarchy, these children deeply touched the lives of those who cared for them. Still, the outside world remained unaware. Official records continued the centuries, old practice, vague death reports, missing names, and genealogies that skipped from one sibling to the next with no explanation. Some families used phrases like died in infancy, even when the child lived for many years. Others recorded the child as a ward or adopted orphan to hide their true identity. The goal remained the same: protect the dynasty's reputation. The clearest documentation from this era comes from the British royal family. Although their most well-known hidden child, Prince John, likely had epilepsy and developed mental disabilities rather than Down syndrome, his treatment mirrors the experience of countless earlier royal children. John was moved to Wood Farm, isolated from public life. His tutors described him as affectionate, cheerful, and full of energy, yet he was kept away from ceremonies, portraits, and official duties. After his death in 1919, the family made only brief statements. Later, reflections by relatives revealed that he had been seen as someone who could not fit into the public role expected of royalty. His story shows that even in the modern era, the pressures of monarchy overshadowed compassion. By the early 20th century, society's understanding of disability took another major step. In 1866, physician John Langdon Down formally described the condition now known as Down syndrome, recognizing it as a distinct developmental difference. His work created a medical framework that future doctors built upon. Slowly, this clarity brought more empathy into families, including royal ones, yet it did not immediately break centuries of secrecy. Monarchies were now tied to global media, photography, and public appearances. A disabled heir could attract scrutiny that royal families feared. Still, attitudes did evolve. Some families quietly ensured disabled children received better care, education, and affection. Monasteries were no longer the only option. Private caregivers, specialized institutions, and medical staff provided environments where children could live more fulfilling lives. Though still hidden, they were often treated with far more humanity than their medieval predecessors. The most significant change, however, came from historians. As archives opened in the 20th and 21st centuries, scholars discovered letters, financial records, and personal diaries that revealed the existence of these hidden royal children. Payments to monasteries, references to delicate or slow children, and sudden disappearances in genealogies began to form patterns. Researchers cross-examined documents from multiple courts, and a fuller picture emerged. Europe's royal families had long concealed the births of children with Down syndrome and other developmental disabilities. Modern historians now widely acknowledge that the number of these hidden children was likely far greater than documented. Because royal families controlled official narratives, much evidence was deliberately destroyed. Yet enough survived to show that these children lived real lives, formed attachments, and influenced their families in private ways the world never saw. Their stories, once erased, are now being reconstructed with care and respect. This re-examination has reshaped public understanding of monarchy. It challenges the myth of flawless dynasties and replaces it with a more truthful human portrait. Monarchs, like all people, faced the joys and sorrows of parenthood. They loved their children, feared judgment, and made decisions shaped by the brutal political realities of their time. Recognizing the existence of these disabled royal children reveals the emotional vulnerability of kings and queens who were forced to act against their hearts for the sake of the crown. Today, societies around the world celebrate children with Down syndrome as valued members of families and communities. They receive specialized support, inclusive education, and opportunities to live fulfilling lives. This modern compassion stands in stark contrast to the secrecy and isolation faced by their royal counterparts centuries ago. Their stories highlight how far humanity has come in understanding dignity, equality, and acceptance. The legacy of these forgotten royal children endures in two powerful ways. First, their lives remind us that disability has always existed, affecting even the world's most powerful families. Second, their erasure teaches an important lesson about the danger of societies that value image over humanity. By acknowledging their stories today, we honor the children who lived quietly behind palace walls, whose names were removed from records, but whose existence shaped families, dynasties, and decisions that influenced world history. Their fate was tragic not because of their condition, but because the world around them had no space for difference. The silence surrounding them reflects a time when power overshadowed compassion. Telling their stories now restores a piece of history long buried, giving voice to children who had none, and acknowledging the humanity that history denied them.